Chapter 24. Severin's eyes snapped open, and a gout of blood spewed from his mouth. His legs collapsed, snapped in two, beneath him, and his chest felt like it was slowly being crushed inward. Just as suddenly as his body started to break, he was in Cyrus's arms, being gently laid on the ground. "Quickly, while he still has time, get close and listen," Cyrus commanded Roland and Sarah. His tone, so unlike any either of them had heard before, forced them into action. "Sarah, protect and guide these two buffoons through the rest of this journey." Coughs racked Severin's body. Pain screamed through him from head to toe. "You are in charge now. Roland, be careful. I don't know what they have planned for you, but don't trust the bastards. Do as they have asked, then wash your hands of all of this. That goes for all of you." His voice grew weaker with each sentence, but so too did the pain. Despite the degradation of his body, a sense of peace was overtaking Severin. "You three mean as much to me as if you were my own. Don't let them take your lives from you. They aren't real gods. You owe them nothing." He held up his hands. Sarah took one, Roland the other. Cyrus knelt at his waist. "Protect each other." He swallowed. "Don't abandon your humanity like I did so long ago." Severin's eyes closed, his breathing slowed, and a calm settled over the trio. They watched over the old man, stayed by his side, and gave him company as he drew his last breath. Cyrus stood and started to walk away from Severin's body. He motioned to Roland. "Come on, let's gather what we need to build the fire." "Fire?" Roland asked, numb. He had just watched a man he half thought of as a god die in a broken body. "Are we setting up camp? Here?" "For the funeral pyre." Cyrus turned to face Roland. Cyrus's eyes were cold. His stare, so much like Severin's once was, now sent chills down Roland's spine. "We can't burn him," Roland whispered. "Burn him?" Sarah shouted, jumping to her feet. She stormed over to Cyrus. "How dare you? We can't just burn him." She jabbed her fingers into his shoulder. "I don't know what has taken hold of you, but snap out of it. We won't be burning Severin. I'm in charge now. You hurt him yourself. We'll take him back to the mountains, get some help, and bury him there and start over." "Severin is dead," Cyrus replied, his voice as cold as his gaze. He caught Sarah's hand as it moved towards his face, almost reflexively. "Denying reality won't change anything. It's too late to turn around. By the time we make it back, Dis will have a lead on us. The last instruction he gave me before we came back was to burn him with the monster's remains, then be on our way to the ruins. After that task is fulfilled, then you are fully in charge." Sarah glared at Cyrus for a moment, then jerked her hand free. "You have a point, and because I don't think you are capable of coming up with something like that on your own, I'll believe you." She moved in close, putting her face just a few inches away from Cyrus's. "And just so you know, the slap wasn't because you said he was dead. That's obvious to any fool. It was because of how you said it." "Where the hell have you been?" Sarah and Cyrus turned as they heard Roland shout. Roland stomped his way across the square towards a figure draped in robes. Sean had finally decided to make an appearance. Before Sarah or Cyrus could fully understand what was happening, Roland had Sean pinned against the nearest building, holding him a few inches off the ground by his neck. "Where the hell were you?" "If you'll put me down," Sean choked out, "I'll explain." Roland dropped Sean to the ground. Sean slowly lifted himself up, dusted off his cloak, and straightened his hood before he decided to speak again. "If you were choking someone, it is hard for them to answer questions, you moron." Roland started to move toward Sean again. Fine. Sean waved his hands at Roland. "I'm sorry." He held out a hand in front of him, trying to make Roland back off. "I'll answer your questions. Quite simply put, I was hiding." "Coward," Roland snarled. "Smart," Sean corrected. "Look what that thing did to the two most experienced fighters in our group. I have concerns other than sacrificing myself for the lot of you." "If you had helped, no one might have died," Roland yelled. Roland tensed as a hand grabbed his shoulder. Cyrus was standing behind him, sympathy spread across his face. "No, they would have still died." "But," Roland started. "But nothing," Cyrus interrupted. "He is no more trained to fight than we were. I can fix that now, but at the time none of us could have changed the outcome. It was luck and recklessness that saved us. Is he a coward? Yes." Cyrus looked up at Sean. "He is a pathetic, spineless coward, but our fight isn't with him. He dropped his hand from Roland's shoulder and stepped back, and gestured back towards Severin's body. Come on, help me prepare the pyre. Roland ground his teeth, anger still flowing through him. He glanced back and forth between Sean and Cyrus. Suddenly, his anger melted away, replaced with resignation and dread at what he knew they had to do. He turned and started to walk away with Cyrus. His friend draped a comforting arm across his shoulders as they headed toward their grim duty. The three young adults stood stolidly around the impromptu bier, flames unlit. They had gathered wood from the wrecked buildings around the square and placed it carefully around the body of their mentor, soaking the wood with lamp oil stolen from a nearby watchtower. They couldn't bear burning him with the body of the monstrosity. Even still, they had soaked the giant thing in oil and were going to light it after Severin. I'm almost finished packing. It took quite a bit of searching to track down that panicked ass. Sean called a little way down the street from the square. Gotta move on. We need to go if we're going to put any distance between this place and us before dark. Roland clenched his fist, fighting down the irritation at Sean. Sarah noticed and reached over to hold his hand. He's rude, but he is right. Let's get this done. She placed her other hand on Cyrus's back. She watched the blacksmith's apprentice. At first glance, he seemed to be stoic. Still, no outward emotion. She knew this was just some new mask he had discovered, though, because tapping into her power, she could see the energies that flowed through him were in just as much, if not more, chaos than Roland and herself. She wasn't sure what had happened during those moments when Severin and Cyrus had seemed to connect, but it seemed as if they had suddenly become very intimate friends. Would you like to say a few words? She asked Cyrus. Not yet, he replied. Roland glanced over at his best friend for the first time since they had finished building the pyre. Something had changed about him, yes, but there were still some signs of his old mannerisms about. A slight shifting of his shoulders, a small downward swing at the corner of his mouth. His right hand gripped into a fist, all signs that Cyrus was upset. I'll go first, then. Get us started. Cyrus looked over to Roland and nodded, thankful he wouldn't have to be first. Roland cleared his throat. My parents died long ago. I remember mourning over them for months. My grandfather having to help calm me down every night so I could sleep. Severin never showed me any sympathy, no mercy when I was misbehaving, even right after they died. I've always loved him for that. I didn't want pity. Wanted everything to go back to normal. He treated me like everything was normal. It may have seemed harsh to someone on the outside, but it was the best thing anyone could have done for me. I won't pretend we were close, but there was no one else in the village I respected more. He sacrificed himself fighting to save us. Roland choked for a moment, paused, and continued. We owe it to him to do as he would. Carry on. Everyone made fun of me for acting like a boy except Severin, Sarah said. I always enjoyed riding horses, shooting the bow, hunting, fishing, things that only the boys were supposed to like. I remember when he brought me my own bow. My father was a little more than irritated with Severin and started to ask him what he thought he was doing. Severin just looked at my father and said, If that's what she's good at, why shouldn't we help her be even better? Sarah laughed after she finished imitating Severin. My father didn't really have a response to him. From that point on, Dad actually started taking me with him hunting and fishing. We made a deal that I would at least pay attention to what Mom tried to teach me around the house if he let me come. Everything kept getting better as time went on. I believe if it weren't for Severin, I would have never been allowed to be me. A tear slowly slid down the side of Sarah's face as she finished. Cyrus stepped forward, holding the torch out from his body. He paused just a foot away from lighting the pyre. I spent 12 months inside his head, training from the man at his best. Learned self-control, dignity, respect, and tenacity from him. The two were right. He loved us. He set me the task of preparing the two of you to fight. I only hope I won't let him down. Cyrus then threw the torch onto the pyre, cutting his speech noticeably short. The flames took instantly and viciously. The fire blazed high into the air, spitting sparks and ash 15 feet off the ground. It wasn't long before the fire spilled over to the monster's corpse, where it continued to grow. The trio realized they needed to leave the town quickly. The fire wasn't going to stop with Severin and the monster. It was going to spread throughout the small fort. Their run was brisk, but not rushed. The fire was spreading, but it hardly mattered since the place had been so thoroughly sterilized of life. Nor was it quick to catch the buildings. Sarah felt it much more fitting that an entire fort was burning down in honor of Severin. The others felt much the same. Though accidental, they had created a blaze befitting of the man at the heart of the fire. Phaedrus approached Felvar. The god was still knelt before the slab holding Gaia's body. The fort appears to be burning, sir. If we are attacked within the hour, you can assume it is Dis, the god grumbled. If, however, no attack comes today, then we can guess the youths have something to do with it. It doesn't matter, though. There's nothing to be done. The god stood, his full frame dwarfing the butler. I'm going to prepare myself in case this is the first sign of a coming attack. He turned toward the butler. I hope it is. I'm done running from that bastard. Chapter 25. Baked earth crunched underfoot as the group trudged on through the wastes. The sun beat down on their shoulders. No wind blew, and haze rose from the horizon. Their destination, the ancient home of Dis, was still a small gray blob on the horizon. How much further ahead is it again? Roland asked. From the way it was explained back in Drakenfell, about 2 solid days' walk from the outpost. So we should reach it by tomorrow night, Sarah answered. Just 2 days before, Roland would have groaned. Just 2 days before, Roland would have groaned. 48 hours, and his childishness would have made him miserable during the trek ahead. Then Severin had been killed. He still felt numb to the experience. Nothing really caused a twitch inside yet. He didn't want to laugh. He didn't want to cry. He just wanted to keep moving. A day and a half's walk in blistering sunlight wasn't too bad at that moment. It may take us just a bit longer. A day and a part of the next, Cyrus said. Why is that? Roland asked. We need to stop early enough to fit in about 5 hours of training each evening and still get 5 hours of sleep, Cyrus replied. 5 hours? Roland said, slightly surprised. That's pretty intense. We won't get much practice, if Severin was right, Cyrus said, his tone as level as the day before. I cannot give you the full training he gave me in just a few days, but I intend to give you as much as I can before you need it. He looked over at Sarah. That reminds me, you'll want to ride the mule for the last half hour of our walk each day. Do we already need to have a conversation about who is in charge? Sarah asked, a little annoyed by Cyrus's blunt instruction. You'll need your energy to heal us. You're the leader overall, yes, but I oversee training. He sighed. But if you insist, I can alter my plans. He locked eyes with Sarah. You are our leader now. I do intend to honor your wishes. I'm sorry if I sounded like I was undercutting you. Sarah decided she had been a little too quick to anger. No, it's okay. I'm just not used to hearing you be so blunt. Wait a minute. Sarah narrowed her eyes at Cyrus. Why in the world will I need to heal you two? I was kind of curious about that myself, Roland spoke up. We won't be holding back. Cyrus turned his attention to Roland. You cannot properly train if you are holding back anything. The only attacks that will be off limits are ones that would be fatal. Otherwise, we will wound each other. We are lucky enough to have someone with us that can heal anything shy of immediate death. Cyrus looked forward again, resuming his perusal of the trail ahead. Roland, however, just watched his friend. He was becoming more and more certain that the man standing beside him now was not the same man he had been just days before. Though, if he were honest with himself, he doubted any of them were the same now. This should be fun, Sean spoke up. Roland jumped at the sound of his voice. He tended to forget about Sean. I get to watch you two beat each other mercilessly for a few days. What makes you think you won't be joining? Roland asked. Because I simply will not, Sean replied. As I've told you before, I travel with you, but I'm not part of you. Fine, Roland thought to himself. If you don't want to be part of it, I'm not going to try and force you. His thoughts then turned to Severin and how hard the older man had seemed to try to get through to Sean. Soon he was walking forward, numb yet again. Roland ducked, let out a burst of electricity in front of him, and then tried to dive to the right. It was met by the metal end of Cyrus's staff as it slammed squarely into his nose. Darkness swallowed his vision, and pain grabbed his nose and curled his toes. As the world started to come back to him, he realized he was lying flat on the ground. Get up, he heard an angry voice calling. It seemed to be coming from the inside of a cave. Get up. Suddenly pain flared in his chest. His vision came back as the pain blossomed. Cyrus had kicked him, actually kicked him, because he wasn't standing up fast enough. Roland didn't even try to contain his anger. Instead, he lashed out, trying to throw a bolt of lightning where Cyrus was standing. Cyrus blurred in his vision and suddenly was right beside him. Don't act out of anger, Cyrus backhanded Roland, collapsing him back down to his knees. Roland tried to swing his sword at Cyrus, But the smith's apprentice was no longer where he had been. "Don't lose sight of your target," the words whispered in his ear just before another hit to his head landed. Roland started lashing out wildly, swinging his sword where he thought Cyrus was, never quite connecting. As his anger built, he also felt another energy building inside of him. Cyrus was starting to nick the exposed skin on Roland's arms each time he came close. Once, twice, 3 times, 4 times. Pain and blood were starting to cover every exposed inch of Roland. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore and let out a yell. As he yelled, he felt the energy burst forth from him in all directions. This time he connected with Cyrus. Cyrus was tossed back by the wave of energy that came out of Roland. He had managed to catch himself in the air, though, and skidded to a standing halt. Severin never said anything about an attack like that. "What the hell are you doing?" Roland shouted at him. Cyrus cocked his head, looking blankly at Roland. "Training you, of course." "Torturing me is more like it." Roland got to his feet and stormed over to his friend. "You've been beating me senseless, cutting me all over, and mocking me for 3 hours. You aren't training me, you are punishing me for not already being trained. You are letting your emotions control you too strongly, and you are still pulling your hits," Cyrus replied. "Pushing you to your limits is the only way to break you out of that habit." "I'm done," Roland said, turning to walk away. "You can't quit," Cyrus said, grabbing Roland's shoulder. "I'm not doing this. I'm not going through this much hell just to learn to fight," Roland said as he jerked his shoulder free. "It's not just to learn to fight," he heard Cyrus mocking him. "What you are doing is learning to survive. We are going to end out facing something that can kill armies, Roland." Roland turned back to his friend. "I have no idea what the hell happened to you, but if this was part of it, I understand why you seem to have lost everything that made you my friend. I will not learn this way. Not only am I not willing, I cannot learn this way. This may have worked for you, but it sure as hell won't work for me." With that, Roland turned and walked back to camp. For the first time, actual anger started to run across Cyrus's face. His nostrils flared, his breathing thickened. He thought about chasing Roland down and showing him, truly showing him, why he needed to train. He could easily beat Roland to within an inch of his life. Only 2 days ago, Roland would have handily been able to beat him. It would be a good reminder for the boy. The boy. The thought stuck in his head. "We're still the same age," he reminded himself. Deciding he would rather think, he turned and walked away from the camp. He wanted to be alone for a little while, and he didn't quite want to enter his meditation grounds just yet. It was still too soon. "He's lost his damn mind," Roland said to Sarah. "There was no lesson in what he did. He just beat me over and over until I finally got so mad that I literally burst." He flinched as she moved her hands up to his arm. "Sorry," she said. "It's just easier the closer my hands are to the wounds I'm healing." "You said you literally burst?" "Yeah, some sort of wave of energy pushed out from me," Roland said, watching the glow from Sarah's hands creep up his arm. There wasn't any pain, nor really any sensation at all. After she closed a wound, it might itch a bit, but even that wasn't consistent. Really, he just felt better in general after she finished. As if not only had the injury not been there, but the area it had been had never been injured in his entire life. "So you did learn something then?" Sarah asked, moving behind Roland so she could start working on his head. "I guess," Roland conceded. "But it isn't like he specifically taught me to do it. He just pushed me until I did it on my own." "That's not even really the point, though. What the hell has happened to him? He's acting like a more intense version of Severin, which I honestly didn't think was possible." The mention of Severin sent a small jolt of sadness through the pair. His death was still at the forefront of their minds, but keeping busy and focusing on their task had been enough to push it aside for now. At some point, Roland knew he would have to deal with it, but that time wasn't right now. "I'll talk to him," Sarah said. "I don't know if he'll listen to even you," Roland said. "Of course he will," Sarah said. "If not because I'm always right, then because I'm the leader." She patted Roland on the head and stood up. "All done, little boy. Now, start on your dinner while I go see to Cyrus." "You want me to cook tonight?" Roland asked. Sarah turned quickly. No. Just get everything ready, and I'll cook when we get back." She breathed out a sigh of relief. They were eating pre-prepared food, so all it really needed was to be heated up and seasoned a bit. Somehow, though, Roland would manage to turn it into leather if given the opportunity. She gathered up a bottle of water and a few other supplies to carry with her, just in case, and started off in the direction of Cyrus. It took her a few minutes, he was well out of earshot. She kept forgetting how the flatness of the land made distances seem shorter. She found Cyrus sitting, watching the horizon. He didn't notice her. He was so lost in his own world that he didn't even twitch until she had taken a seat right beside him. "So, I hear you have become a bit brutal," Sarah asked. "We have to grow, quickly, or we'll die," Cyrus replied, his voice the same level tone it had been since his ascent. "Not everything is about becoming physically stronger or more capable," she said. "Right now, it is. As we are, Dis will simply swat us aside like insects," he replied. "That may be true, but what about teamwork?" she asked. "I'm not the one refusing to train," Cyrus said. "Cyrus, what happened when you took Severin's hand?" Sarah asked. Cyrus, for the first time since she sat, turned to look at her. He studied her for a moment. She felt as if he were judging her somehow. "He pulled me into his mind." He faced back out toward the horizon. "It looked much like this place. I think he made it that way to make the training easier on me. Time worked differently there. We spent a year training." "A year?" Sarah asked, a tinge of disbelief in her voice. "Yes," Cyrus said firmly. "A full year. No sleep, no eating, no rest. 1 solid year training. All day, every day." The full meaning of what Cyrus said dawned on Sarah. For 1 year's worth of time, he had done nothing but train to fight. I don't know what to say. It doesn't sound fun at all." "At first it was hell," Cyrus replied. "But once I accepted it and started to listen, truly listen to Severin, everything started making sense. I just wish my body still matched my training." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked. "I still know and can do everything he showed me. But there's one catch. My mind knows it all, but my muscles were never built up to match what I could do. My muscle memory still isn't where it was while I trained. So, I have to basically retrain myself while teaching Roland. Well, I suppose I did have to while I taught Roland." "You might want to remember that you aren't still there. You're back in the real world now," Sarah said. Cyrus seemed to be ready to object, but Sarah cut him off. "I don't mean that you shouldn't teach the way you were taught. I mean you might want to try to bring back some of your old personality and compassion. I loved Severin, but I hate to think that the last thing he did was to take away the things that made you who you are." "That wasn't his intention," Cyrus said. "How do you know?" "He told me not to lose myself." Cyrus paused for a moment. It seemed to strike a nerve. "How can I not lose who I was and still do what needs to be done?" he asked. "Simple," Sarah said. He turned to look at her, the question clear on his face. "Come on, you know this. Just be happy. At its heart, that is what made you who you were. You were always happy." "Can I share something with you?" Cyrus asked, the stoic mask he had been wearing seeming to crack a little. "Since when do you think you have to even ask that?" Sarah said. "I'm worried. Terrified, actually." He started running his fingers through the dirt around him, clearly nervous about sharing. "From the way he talked, there's virtually no chance we can survive this. I don't think I really understood before." His gaze met Sarah's. "I cannot lose the two of you, even if that means sacrificing who I was. I have to protect you and help you protect yourselves." "Oh, Cyrus." Sarah scooted closer and put her head on his shoulder. "We could have run. We could have chosen to hide. We all came along voluntarily, and believe it or not, I fully understood what the potential cost might be the first time Severin told us. Roland, I'm sure, understood as well, given how much he has already lost. If you kill off the person you were to try and protect us, then you might as well wave goodbye to the relationships that mean so much to you. That, to me, wouldn't be worth the extra couple of days a bit of self-defense lessons might buy me." Cyrus leaned his head over against Sarah's. "I just don't want to lose anyone else. Besides, I trained for a year. How do you expect me to just shrug off all that discipline overnight?" "Don't get me wrong, young man," Sarah mockingly scolded. "The discipline is fantastic. Just lighten up a bit. You don't have to be Mr. Serious now, but I don't expect you to go back to being the high king of procrastination. You're just grown up a bit. You can still be a smartass, though." "Well, Mother, thank you for the advice," Cyrus said, a smile curling the corner of his mouth. "You don't have to start with me," Sarah said, simply happy that he seemed at least willing to try. That was pretty harsh on him, Cyrus said. You broke his nose, 2 ribs, cracked his skull, and gave him about 50 cuts. Yes, I would say harsh is the appropriate way to describe what you were. I wouldn't even rule out downright cruel, Sarah said, genuinely scolding him this time. That much, eh? Cyrus shifted around a bit. I guess I owe him an apology. He does need to stop pulling his hits, but I guess I could also not deliberately try to hurt him. I think when he starts landing hits on you, again, I may just have to let you sit and suffer for a bit as penance, Sarah teased. Cyrus put his arm around her shoulders, pulled her in close, and whispered, Don't worry. As long as you are the one giving the punishment, I think I can handle it. A smile split his face. Sarah pulled back, punched his shoulder, and started laughing. The plains of Purgatory were veiled in a thick mist. It swirled and spun around the pair as they walked, and were it not for the hard crunch of the baked earth underfoot, Lyra would have sworn they were walking on clouds. She had noticed it never seemed to get dark, but it never was full bright here either. Instead, it was as if they were perpetually walking through the gloom before a serious storm. It did get darker and lighter, but not with as sharp of a contrast as the living world. In the forest it had been harder to notice the differences. Here, in the open, they were obvious. Supposedly, walking through Purgatory would get them to their destination much faster. But Lyra still would have preferred simply trudging through the real world. At least there, she didn't feel like she was constantly being watched. Suddenly, Dis held up a hand. Lyra let herself melt into the mist and shadows swirling around them, just as she had practiced. She never knew if he was testing her or if he had spotted something ahead. He preferred for her to treat every situation as seriously as possible. His humor had been very subdued since their encounter with Gaia. At least his hair was mostly black again. A small portion of mist directly in front of Dis started to clear off as if a wind were blowing it away. Oily black shadows coalesced into a humanoid form in front of him. Slowly the figure rose from the ground, growing and growing until it stood well over 6 feet tall. The figure had 4 faces, 6 arms, and a single pair of massive legs. Disor, Dis said. You look quite different than when I last saw you. What happened to the gifts I gave you? They had to be abandoned, the deep, monotonous voice of the demon intoned. The Time Warden was accompanied by a fully trained scion. Dis took a moment to examine the now complete demon. He was naked but lacking all the parts necessary to make that fact be embarrassing. Each face on the monster's head seemed vastly different from the one beside it. On the front, there were simply eyes and a hole for a nose. Where the mouth should be, there was only frayed skin that stretched as the creature spoke. On the right side, it held the face of a middle-aged man with a thick red beard. On the left was the face of a young woman that seemed quite friendly. On the back was a sharp, stern-looking male face that somehow gave the impression of being from a bald man. The arms decorating the creature's sides were evenly spaced. The lower pairs simply crossed in front of its body, the upper pairs helping make it clear the creature was bowing. Dis decided that instead of keeping multiple legs, Disor must have combined them all into a single pair. The legs the creature had were heavily corded with muscle and much thicker than they had any right to be. Overall, the creature painted a very intimidating sight, but not quite the monstrous sight Dis had wanted. I risked a lot to deliver all those souls to you, and you simply tossed them away? We were being beaten. There were too many voices. We were overwhelmed. The creature paused. We couldn't decide what to do quickly enough to respond to their attacks. We had power, yes, but no clarity with which to direct it. Dis considered this. He hadn't imagined that the demon still had to contend with the voices of the damned that they stole to manifest. Why didn't you simply suppress them, bend them to your will? That is not how we work, Your Majesty, Disor said. Dis noticed the strange echo in the creature's voice. One can suppress the wills and thoughts of spirits that one has taken control of, but a great deal of their strength is pushed down as well. We use their full strength. Interesting. Dis decided to file that away for later thought. Enough distractions, though. Were you successful? We did kill the Elder Scion and delivered a fatal blow to the Warden, Disor spoke. We did not witness the Warden die, but we have killed them before, and this wound will be enough. We could not kill any of the children, though. They managed to damage our hearts and forced us to flee. The Time Warden is dead, though? Dis asked. Yes, master. Dis smiled and let out a laugh. Good. Maybe that will break their will to continue. Like you said, they are children. I don't particularly want to kill them. May I ask a question, sire? Disor asked. Go ahead, Dis said, still elated to find out about Severin's death. Where is your daughter? Disor asked. Lyra, you can come out now. Dis held out his arm and Lyra walked over to stand by his side, letting him drape his arm across her shoulders. Did you not sense her nearby? No, our lord, Disor replied. She has learned the shadows well. Dis cocked an eyebrow as he looked down at Lyra. That is quite the compliment coming from him. Lyra smiled, pressing down the sorrow she felt. She didn't understand why learning of Severin's death affected her as it did. It felt like a betrayal of her father for her to feel upset with something he had chosen to do. She was strong, though, so she could suppress this feeling and not spoil his moment. All right. Disor, would you like some more souls to rebuild your last form? Dis asked. No, our lord. Dis noted that Disor kept referring to himself in the plural. We are happy as we are. We believe we are stronger as we are. Fine, then. But note that you do have my permission to harvest as many humans as you would like, Dis said. Thank you, sire. There is one last piece of information we wish to impart, the creature echoed. Near the outpost, there appears to be a large number of unresting trapped beneath the ground. Really? Dis asked. That is quite interesting. Dis considered this information for a moment. It is decided, then. Head back to the outpost and wait. We are going home, for now, but we will pass by on our way to visit the coward. We'll fetch you then. Dis started to dismiss the creature, but then decided he wasn't quite finished with him yet. He took the pack off his back that he was carrying supplies for Lyra in and took out one of the robes he had borrowed from a priest. Letting it open fully, he realized it would be just long enough to come down to about mid-calf on Disor. Here, this has a hood. If you need to be discreet, wear it and walk with a hunch. People will assume you are a beggar priest and leave you alone, even if you are a giant. Thank you, sir. The creature donned the robe at once. We will make ourselves fat and short if we need to walk amongst the living. Now, you are dismissed. Dis waved a hand at the creature. Disor bowed deeply, then plunged headfirst into the ground, disappearing much more quickly than he had appeared. Severin really dead? Lyra asked. I have never known Disor to be wrong about whether or not he killed someone, so I would say yes. Of course, I have little experience being on the same side as him, Dis replied. I trust your commitment, so I will tell you this. There is no shame in feeling some sorrow at the passing of someone you once cared about, even if they died at your hand. Just don't let it bother you for too long. After all, you committed to this path. A small bit of relief swept through Lyra. Yes, Father, thank you. Yet she still felt like she had made a bad choice somewhere along the way. You should be getting excited, Dis said. Why? Lyra asked. In just a few hours, we'll be back to my old home, Dis said. We're going to fetch a few items I need. Then we will be unstoppable. But more than that, you get to see where you would have grown up had your mother and I never been betrayed. This perked up Lyra a little bit. Her curiosity about what her childhood home should have been started to stir up some of the dreams she had had during her real childhood. Maybe this visit could help push out whatever knot it was that had started to form inside her. That does sound exciting, she said to her father, showing him a genuine smile. Good, my dear. He patted her on the back. Let's go.